We've been on this land for over 12,000 years, some say longer, and when we walk on the land, and when at least in my experience, when I'm walking on the land, I feel like 12,000 years of history. I feel the tears and joys of my ancestors 12,000 years. I mean, that's a lot of history when we consider only 500 years from contact. You know, I mean, that's nothing. There's 12,000 years of a continuation of a race of people on this continent. I can't deny that. I just accept it and enjoy it. It's a part of me.
At the time Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean, hundreds of Native American cultures existed at all levels of development. Thinking he had reached the East Indies, Columbus labeled the natives Indians. The name would stick and be applied to a vast array of peoples across the continent. At that time, the unmapped North American continent supported several million persons. More than 200 languages were spoken throughout the land. By 1492, inhabitants had lived in the area that would one day be known as Montana for nearly 12,000 years. Not yet labeled by tribal names, they referred to themselves only as the people. For these people, 1492 meant nothing. Their lifeways had changed little over thousands of years and would remain unchanged for at least another 200 years.
Montana is fortunately located so that peoples coming into North America may well have come down along the eastern foothills of the Rockies, which passes through Montana, and or they may have come down inside the Rocky Mountain Trench or moved southward when valleys were freed of blocking Cordilleran ice sheets and moved south down inside the Rockies. So since Montana shares the Rocky Mountains in its western one-third and the high plains in its eastern two-thirds, initial peoples moving into the New World, not as migrations, but more as groups of people expanding beyond former range, seeking food, might well have come through Montana as one of a number of possible routes southward.
History has been written that the Blackfeet came from the Great Lakes region. We never have came from that region. When Hendray came here in 1754, and some of the Hudson Bay people asked where the Blackfeet came from, and they pointed east, meaning the Sand Hills in Saskatchewan. We've always been in this area. We believe that we've been here for thousands and thousands of years. We have proof that we've been here over 2,500 years by some of the remains found in Alberta. They asked us to go back. The Hudson Bay Company, when they came into this country, they asked us to go back and visit their posts on the Hudson Bay, said many gifts would be given to our chiefs and to our people. And our people said, no, we do not know how to paddle canoes and we don't eat fish. And so that also includes that we've always been in this area. We were definitely here 500 years ago, and we can trace our roots practically back that far when before Columbus landed, because our people were here and very much alive. And those were what we call the dog days. That's how our people traveled, by using the dog with the harness hooked up to the teepee poles, and as we traveled in those days. So we were very much here and alive and roaming these hills before Columbus came.
In 1492, the climate, the environment, the resource potential of the state was essentially as it is today. If you could subtract in your own mind all of the historical, cultural landscape that exists today, repopulate the landscape with millions of bison, you would be seeing the area as people at that time knew it and lived in it. They were extensively distributed throughout the mountains and the high plains of Montana. They were all foot nomads, because in 1492, we're still 2 centuries away from the arrival of the horse, introduced by other Indians.
Timber and brush lodges provided shelter for the people. Several remote lodges still stand. Life changed with every season. Long, cold winters were spent huddled in river valleys against the wind. When geese were seen flying north, warmer days were near. Soon it was time to move camp. By spring, food supplies were low. Perhaps as men fashioned projectile points, women repaired and fashioned new clothing. By late spring, the people dug roots and bulbs, a welcome change in diet.
This is the root of an arrowhead balsam. If you've seen these sunflower-looking plants all over the hillside in these mountainous areas, well, this is the type of root they had. And I don't relish it, but when they were fresh, they looked like banana. You know, a banana when I peeled it, and I thought, well, I'm going to try it. So I put it in broth, hot broth, and let it cook for as long as it wanted to, and it became jellied, and when I spread the jelly out, then it made a real nice, fine soup.
People were organized on the basis of the principle of kinship. Mother and father, their children, the parent of one or another of the parents of the children, perhaps brothers and sisters, cousins, living together as a cooperative group, engaging in communal hunting ventures, communal processing of food, or collective processing of food.
By late summer, with grass high and animals fat, family groups would band together for a communal bison kill.
Let me tell you about this jump here. Years ago, about 30 years ago, it was my good fortune to have interviewed a tribal storyteller, historian, and I asked him about buffalo jumps. He said, oh yes, I know a good one. I said, go ahead, and I set up my recording machine, and he turned it on, and he started in. He mentioned this one here. The Indian name, Crow Indian name for this jump here is called Awashede Hutchye, which means long ridge. And the buffalo jump, long ridge buffalo jump would be the proper description. So, well, tell me about it. I said, all right, I will tell you all about it. The evening before the buffalo jump, of course, previous to that time, they would already scout around and would notice buffalo up there on the ridge. So that evening before, a medicine man who specializes in buffalo jumps would take over. So he would select 8 men who have had experience in such operation. So he would get the men together and talk to them and give them instructions and so forth. And early next morning, before daybreak, they would come up here, go up to that point there, and he would place 4 men on one drive line and 4 on the other drive line. And he himself would stand at the edge of the cliff up there and would hold 2 small hindquarters of a young buffalo and would hold the legs pointing along the drive line that we saw up there. Then he would sing his sacred song, the medicine songs they're called. He'd sing a song, and when he's through, he'd place that down and would go through other rituals. And he would pick the hindquarters up and sing again, would do that 4 times. On the 4th one, the 4 men would take off along the line of rocks. After having gone about quarter of a mile, half a mile, they would stop. And there, one of them would open a sack of incense, some kind of an incense, I don't know. They use all kinds of herbs and barks for incense. And they would burn incense there a little bit, build a small fire. put it out, then they go on again about half a mile on up. They would stop and do the same thing. They would do it 4 times. The 4th time they would be pretty high up as far as they could go. There they would make their last incense offering, and from there they would start coming together and form a long line, drivers. Then they would start in. I suppose they would make what noise that they could make, holler and so forth. Maybe pawn on some dried buffalo hides and so forth. But they would start in, and the buffalo would start getting up, moving around, started in. And as the drive accelerates, while these buffaloes started running, And as they come down the ridge there, the more and more buffalo are picked up. Also, there were deer and elk up there. They're caught in there too. And the strange part about this, the buffalo would try to break out either way, right or left, and they came to that line of rocks and would stop there and quickly swing back into the main herd. And that would happen all the way down. So that even the birds would kind of mill around up there. So there's a lot of mystique going on here. Some kind of mysterious power put into play. And according to this Charlie Tenbury, I asked him, I said, all right, so after they have a bunch of buffalo dead under the cliff, what do? Well, the women folks, old men, everybody goes up there to that point and starts skinning. And those that are crippled are put to death by the men around there with big tomahawks of stone or are shot with arrows with small points. And they're killed there. So they would kind of quarter the carcasses there and bring the hind quarters, front quarters, ribs, and so forth to a butchering place here near the river here. And there they sit under the shade of these big cottonwood trees and start processing the meat. And of course the butchers are mostly women, so they know what they were doing. Then after they've gotten all their hides off, then the meat processing takes place. They would take the quarters to their main butchering ground some distance away from there in the shade by the river where they can wash the meat and so forth. And there they would cut the meat into chunks for immediate use or roast ribs for immediate use. But they would make wide strips of meat, thin about that thick, and dry it out and make what we call jerky that we buy in the store now. So they would have a bunch of them that big, fold it up nicely and put it in parfleche cases, stored away I imagine by the hunters for the winter. So during the winter they have that dried pemmican, dried meat to make pemmican and so forth. So they don't waste anything at all. They take the horns for drinking cups, spoons, and utensils of that sort. Same way with hoofs. And of course for decorations, certain parts of the hide, maybe the tail for decoration handle to a tomahawk. And so they don't waste anything of the meat at all.
I'll show you a few. This is buffalo now. And you see how it is in chunks? The reason, I imagine the reason why somebody called it jerky back there is because they actually jerked it off. They chopped it and they jerked it off. This is deer. And you see the stronger, coarse thing there. Sometimes they used a little tallow, left it on there so that it would